Discover the timeless lesson of the Sparrow's song. A tale that will remind you that true joy isn't found in what you have, but in the simple beauty of each moment. Stay with us until the end, and let the melody of this story lift your heart and spirit in ways you never expected. The hills outside Jerusalem stretched endlessly, bathed in the soft golden light of the late afternoon. The air was crisp and carried the fragrance of earth and growing things, soothing the weary travelers. The world seemed still, as though time itself had slowed, giving those who rested there a rare moment of peace. A group of men, worn from days of travel, sat in a loose circle on the soft green grass. Their clothes, though simple, were dusty from the long journey, and their faces showed the tiredness that came with the weight of their mission. They were disciples, students, friends, and followers of the man who sat at the center of the group, Jesus. Jesus' presence was calm, like the eye of a storm, unshaken by the trials they had faced. The disciples, though burdened by the challenges of their travels, were comforted by his peaceful demeanor. The day's heat began to recede, and the coolness of evening touched their skin. As they sat together in silence, their hearts heavy with the struggles they had endured, Jesus looked up toward the sky, and then over the faces of those gathered with him. He knew their hearts, knew the burdens they carried, but he also understood the power of rest, of quiet moments. Among them sat Peter, the ever-vocal disciple, his brow furrowed in thought. Peter had always been a man of action, quick to speak, quick to move, but today he felt a deep restlessness he couldn't shake. Thomas, ever the skeptic, sat with his arms crossed, looking distant as if the weight of the journey had left him questioning more than ever. The sons of Zebedee, James and John, leaned toward one another, murmuring quietly, as if trying to make sense of their place in this unfolding mission. Every one of them, in their own way, was struggling with the path they had chosen. They had given so much, but doubts lingered like shadows in their hearts. Jesus, sensing the tension among them, stood slowly and motioned for them to follow. He led them to a small clearing where the grass swayed gently in the evening breeze. Without a word, he sat down, and one by one, the disciples settled beside him. The stillness of the moment seemed to wrap itself around them, a moment of peace in an otherwise turbulent world. And then, just as the sun began its descent below the horizon, something unexpected happened. A sound, soft at first but then rising in clarity. It was the song of a sparrow. Its sweet, pure melody filled the air, gentle and unhurried. The disciples turned toward the source of the song, their tired minds momentarily lifted by the simple beauty of the bird's song. Peter, always quick to wonder, turned to Jesus, his voice low with curiosity. "Master, why does the sparrow sing so happily? It has no riches, no great home. It is small, insignificant. Yet it sings with such joy." Jesus, who had been quietly listening to the bird's song, smiled. His expression was one of understanding, but his eyes held a deeper wisdom. He glanced toward the sparrow, still perched on a tree branch, its chest swelling with each note. "Peter," he began, his voice soft yet full of meaning, "the sparrow does not sing because it has everything it desires. It sings because it is alive, because it is grateful for each breath, for each moment it is given. It sings not because it is powerful or mighty, but because it knows the beauty of simply being." The disciples fell into silence, captivated by the truth in Jesus' words. They had been so focused on the burdens of their mission, their constant striving, that they had failed to notice the simple joys that were always around them. The song of the sparrow, fleeting and gentle as it was, seemed to speak directly to their souls, reminding them that there was beauty even in the smallest, simplest things. As the song of the sparrow continued to fill the air, a deep, reflective silence descended over the group. Thomas, who often struggled with doubt, finally broke the silence, his voice tinged with skepticism. "Master, how can we sing like the sparrow? We face so many challenges, so much suffering. How can we find joy when the world is so heavy with sorrow?" Jesus looked at Thomas with a softness that seemed to cut through the hardness of his doubt. He knew Thomas well, understood the weight of the questions that constantly churned within him. Jesus rose slowly and with a calm gesture, beckoned the disciples to follow him to a nearby hill that overlooked the valley. They walked together, the sun casting long shadows behind them, and as they reached the top, Jesus stopped and turned to face them. "The path you walk is difficult," he said, his voice both compassionate and strong. "I know your hearts are heavy with doubt and fear. But joy is not something that comes from the absence of struggle. It is not a thing to be earned or won. It is a gift freely given. The sparrow sings not because it knows the future, not because it is certain of what is to come, but because it is alive. And that is enough." The disciples listened intently, but there was still a sense of confusion in their eyes. Peter, unable to shake the doubts that had begun to stir in his own heart, asked, "But how can we, with all that we carry, embrace such joy? The road ahead is uncertain. What is there to be joyful about?" Jesus paused, letting the question linger in the air. The wind whispered through the trees around them, and for a moment, it seemed that the entire world held its breath. "Joy is not found in perfect circumstances," he said quietly, almost to himself. "It is found in the simplicity of the present moment. It is found in the warmth of the sun on your face, the feeling of the earth beneath your feet, the song of the sparrow that calls you to pause and remember the gift of today." Thomas, who had remained silent, looked down, his mind churning with the weight of Jesus' words. He had been so focused on what was lacking in his life, so consumed by the doubts that plagued him, that he had forgotten to notice the beauty around him. The sparrow's song, the gentle evening breeze, it all felt like a distant memory, buried beneath the weight of his fears. The next morning, as the disciples resumed their journey, a quiet tension hung in the air. The road was long, and the weight of the mission seemed to press harder with each passing step. Thomas, though he had heard the wisdom in Jesus' words, still wrestled with his doubts. His thoughts turned in circles, consumed with questions he couldn't answer. How could he find joy when his heart was so full of uncertainty? How could he trust in the small moments when the world seemed so overwhelmingly complex? As they walked, the group became aware of a growing sense of heaviness in Thomas. He walked slower than the others, his shoulders slumped as though the weight of his questions was too much to bear. Peter, noticing this, fell back beside him. "Thomas," he said quietly, "what troubles you? You seem distant." Thomas didn't respond at first. He focused on the path ahead, his thoughts swirling in a storm of doubt. Finally he spoke, his voice heavy with frustration. "I want to believe, Peter. I truly do. But how can I? The world is so full of suffering. The weight of it crushes me. How can there be joy in that? How can I sing as the sparrow does, when my heart feels so heavy?" Peter was quiet for a moment, trying to find the right words. He had always been the bold one, quick to speak and quick to act, but he knew this was different. Thomas wasn't looking for answers in the same way others might. He needed understanding, a light in the darkness that seemed to envelop him. "Thomas," Peter said, his voice softer now, "I don't have all the answers, but I think Jesus is trying to teach us something. He's trying to show us that even in the darkest moments, there is light. Even when the world feels heavy, there is still beauty. We don't have to have all the answers. We just have to be willing to see the good in each day." Thomas glanced at Peter, the weight of his words sinking in slowly. He wasn't sure he believed it, but there was something in Peter's voice, a quiet conviction, that made him want to try. After hours of walking, they came to a quiet clearing where a small stream trickled through the rocks. The sound of the water was soothing, the gentle babble of the stream a welcome contrast to the heavy silence that had followed them for days. Jesus, sensing the need for rest, motioned for the disciples to stop. They gathered around the stream, sitting on the soft grass, their tired bodies grateful for the break. "Take a moment," Jesus said, his voice calm and deliberate. "Sit in stillness and listen. Do not think about the road ahead or the burdens that weigh on your hearts. Simply listen to the world around you." The disciples closed their eyes, allowing the sounds of nature to wash over them. The birds, the rustling of the leaves, the whisper of the wind, it was as though the world had paused, offering them a moment of grace. For the first time in days, Thomas allowed himself to relax. He let go of the constant need to search for answers, the pressure of trying to solve everything. He simply listened. And in that moment he understood. Joy was not something to chase, something to seek out or force. It was something to receive, a gift that came when one stopped, when one paused long enough to truly listen to the beauty around them. The days that followed were different. Thomas, though still burdened by doubt, began to feel lighter. The weight of his questions didn't seem so oppressive anymore. He began to notice the small moments that had once escaped him, the smile of a child they passed on the road, the warmth of a fire shared with the others at night, the soft rustling of the leaves in the wind. These moments, once unnoticed, began to fill him with a quiet sense of peace. Peter, too, seemed to be learning. His laughter was lighter, his heart more open. Even in the midst of their hardships, he had begun to find joy in the small things, the simple pleasures that made life worth living. And as they traveled together, the disciples grew closer, bound by their shared experiences, their shared understanding of the quiet power of joy. And all the while, the sparrow's song echoed in their hearts. The sparrow had sung not because it had everything it needed, but because it had life. And that, Jesus had taught them, was enough. As the journey continued, the disciples found themselves walking with lighter steps. They had come to understand that joy didn't always have to come in grand gestures or profound moments. Sometimes, joy was found in the smallest of things: the smile of a child, the gift of a flower, the warmth of a shared meal. These small moments, fleeting though they might be, were like threads that wove a tapestry of peace in their hearts. Thomas, who had once questioned the very possibility of joy, now walked with a sense of quiet contentment. The weight of his doubts had not disappeared, but he had come to understand that joy was not about perfection. It was about being present, about finding beauty in the ordinary, about appreciating what was given in each moment. Peter too had changed. The fire that had once burned so brightly in him, always seeking answers and solutions, now burned with a quieter intensity. He had come to understand that joy was not something that could be forced. It was a gift, a grace that flowed freely to those willing to receive it. As the days passed, Thomas continued to reflect on the small moments that had brought him peace. He began to understand that joy was not something to be found in grand victories or in the absence of struggle, but in the simple acts of grace that filled each day. The disciples continued their journey, but now they walked with lighter hearts. They had learned to find joy in the world around them, to see the beauty in even the simplest things. And in doing so, they had learned a powerful truth. Joy was not something to be sought after, but something to be received. One evening, as they sat beneath the stars, Jesus spoke once more. His voice was gentle but full of authority. "My friends," he said, "do not wait for the perfect moment to experience joy. It is always within reach, waiting to be embraced. The sparrow sings not because it has everything it needs, but because it knows that life itself is enough. You must learn to do the same." The disciples listened, each one reflecting on the truth of his words. They had seen the power of joy in the smallest of moments, and now they understood that it was a gift that could not be earned, only received. As they continued their journey, the song of the sparrow, though long gone, remained in their hearts. It was a song that could not be forgotten, a reminder that joy was always within reach, even in the darkest of times. The disciples no longer walked with heavy hearts, burdened by doubt and fear. They walked with the lightness of those who had learned the secret of the sparrow's song, that joy was not in what they had, but in what they received from each moment. Years later, as the disciples looked back on their journey with Jesus, they remembered the lessons he had taught them on that quiet hill. The song of the sparrow had become a part of their lives, a reminder that joy could be found even in the simplest of things. And as they shared the story with others, they always spoke of the same truth that Jesus had shared with them. Joy is not found in the absence of struggle, but in the presence of God, in the small moments that fill our lives with grace. This is end of the story. Comment amen if you believe in Jesus' blessings. Please like this video and subscribe this channel for more Jesus story like this. May the God watch over you.